So it might sound like a contradiction in terms to talk about a legal entity for a DAO. And I kind of want to pose the question of whether this is a really awkward marriage between a new technology that's supposed to enable super scalable, decentralized, permissionless organizations and like legacy systems that are kind of overbearing, heavy, not really rationally designed, but kind of have accumulated over time through tradition. And so keep thinking about whether or not what I'm talking about makes sense, and whether, because I want people to push back and make different versions of this if you're interested and willing. So yeah, so the difference here is it this awkward marriage of old and new, or is it a Trojan horse to unleash some sort of new power principle, basically wrapping this DAO in a legal entity? So first I'll give you some background on the group that I'm with, dOrg. We build open source tooling, mostly in the DAOstack ecosystem, and we run ourselves as a DAO, and a DAO dev shop. Can't see it here. So yeah, here's a couple projects we work on. The DAO creator, Jordan talked to them about them in more detail in the other room. Continuous funding for DAOs funded by Gnosis through a Gecko grant. And open source tooling for basically building DAO applications using a React component library. And right now we're also working on an identity DAO, which is a DAO curating a registry of human identities as a solution for identity on Ethereum. Yeah, so dOrg operates today as a DAO. All of our payments to ourselves, all of our decisions, all of our admission of new membership is through a DAO that we use Alchemy to access. So you can see a sampling of some proposals that have passed recently and the different members who have passed them. So why do we need a legal entity? It seems like Alchemy works. We can pass proposals, we can pay ourselves, we can accept new clients, we can accept new contributors. Well, the problem, there's two problems actually. One is the issue of legal personality. Our business model depends on accepting contracts with clients, usually corporations, and then taking in money from them and having a service agreement. And so to enter into a legally binding agreement, you need to have legal agency. You need the ability to act as a single unit. And without the corporate veil, it's impossible to have a business ID or tax ID, which is what most businesses rely on when signing an agreement with you. So we quickly found out as we were starting out, we were a DAO, we're like, this is great. We're like, oh, we can't get clients because the first person we talked to says like, how could we sign a contract with you? Where's your entity located? What's your mailing address? And the other one is liability. So the law considers, and I'm speaking from an American perspective, I'm not familiar with laws everywhere, but the law considers you a general partnership if you don't have a corporate veil around your collaboration. And the problem with that is that all members are liable for the entire debts of the entity. So if one member of your group kind of made an agreement with someone that you would do a bunch of work for them worth like $1 million, and then you don't deliver, then anyone in that group can be liable for that one person's promise. And what a corporation does through this construct of limited liability is limit your private losses to what you put into the entity. So yeah, we really wanted to design a legal entity that wouldn't obstruct the fundamental qualities of a DAO, because what's the point if we have to put in a manager and also have every proposal checked by a whitelist that has some legal registered agent handling everything, which is, to be honest, a lot of the hybrids I've seen out there, like mixing law and smart contracts, kind of short circuit the power of smart contracts in the first place. So what are the fundamental characteristics? So really quickly, it's decentralized. There's a lot of interpretation of what this means. But to me, it's fundamentally that there's no kind of one entity, whether internal, that can use their own interests above the interest of the group. And the fact that all the rules of the organization are encoded in software that's self-executing, so it lives on some sort of public computing infrastructure that will execute the function calls regardless of kind of external interference. And there's other qualities. You could probably list like 10 more, but those seem essential to me. So yeah, we went on this quest kind of to find a legal entity. We looked into a lot of the new laws coming out. We looked into a lot of regular laws that were already on the books. And we stumbled upon something pretty interesting that the legislature of Vermont passed in July of 2018 that really seemed like it hadn't been utilized yet. And what this law essentially does is it carves out a new legal entity that is specifically allowed to reference blockchain code as its source of truth, as its source of authority for everything from ownership right distribution to entering of binding legal agreements. Anything that a company does, you can have this lightweight legal agreement that just says it's all happening on this DAO. Here's generally how this DAO works, and then you're off. And then you don't have to come back and edit documents every time you add a new member. You don't have to update some sort of paper somewhere that has the ownership, like cap table. And so here's an excerpt from the law itself. I would really encourage people to go out and read it if you're interested. It's pretty short. It's like 3 pages long, the relevant part of the law. But it only asks you to do these things to be able to establish a valid BBLLC. And these are pretty simple things, what your organization is supposed to do, how the voting procedures work, what you're going to do if something breaks, and yeah, what the members are kind of expected to do. And then I also want to point out how flexible this is, because a lot of the first question I get when talking about this a lot is, oh, but what if I upgrade my DAO? Then the whole entity is just pointing at the wrong thing. The whole kind of interesting thing about DAOs is that they can self-amend. They can fix themselves. They can upgrade their code. But the law explicitly states that you can upgrade your code. You just have to mention in the operating agreement how these upgrades would happen and how people participating would know about it. So we incorporated in Vermont, but again, that was like the easy part. The hard part was coming up with all the documents that would make sure that our legal entity actually was tightly coupled with the way that our DAO worked, so that there was no disjunctures in those two structures. And so you'll see that we're intending to accept members and new clients and post bids to work on things through this entity that lives on chain and where all the decisions happen on chain. And we started off with 3 members. Today we have 10, but we don't have to update any documents with the names of those members. They can be anonymous because ownership of LLCs, at least in Vermont, is you don't have to register it anywhere. So yeah, we have some nice qualities of a legal entity, and we have not so nice qualities that we don't enjoy in corporations that makes them slower and more prone to abuse and subgroup collusion and plutocracy. So where do we go from here? This wasn't easy. The documents, the processes to actually pass legal agreements through our DAO is really tricky. Right now, there's not a good way to do persistent storage of like versioned documents, which if you want to look at all the agreements that a DAO has gotten into, you would want to know, okay, who signed this agreement? What version did they sign? And so right now, a lot of this is done using GitHub and linking proposals to our GitHub repository, but it'd be nice to have some tooling, for example, to make that a smoother process. Also, bookkeeping and taxes are a big open question. We're going to have to do a lot of this manually for our first year, but we also see the potential to create software that automates the generation of tax reports, of invoices, 1099s for members. And we've already started open sourcing our agreements, and I'd encourage you to all check them out. I'll give you the link in a minute. But essentially making this not something you have to go to a lawyer to necessarily do. Maybe if you have a special use case, you want to do some variations, you have a really specific design in mind, you could go talk to lawyers, but ideally these vetted documents would be out there in the public domain for anyone who wants to start a DAO that has a legal entity. They could just, with a few clicks of the button or copy pasting, do it themselves. Yeah, my call to action is for other people to try this. It wasn't that difficult to stand up. Like I said, it was difficult to figure out the nuances of maintaining it and making sure it stays compliant, kind of with what we had laid out in the operating agreement. But you can try this anywhere with any type of entity, and you can get creative with it. I'm curious to see like political parties or labor unions that are set up with DAOs that have the typical charters of those sorts of organizations, but they happen to point to something on chain as the source of truth for their operations. So yeah, think about it a bit more. Is this something that's going to kind of be a Trojan horse to get DAOs into the mainstream, to connect up with the global economy, 99.999% of which is off-chain? Is it going to allow DAOs to interact with governments, to interact with corporations, and maybe unleash a new power principle of egalitarianly organized, scalable on-chain organizations? Steal our operating agreement. I'm not a lawyer, and I can't recommend that you use it, but take a look at it. Maybe talk to a lawyer about how you might be able to use it. Maybe you are a lawyer. Oh. Yep. Yeah, and if you go to our website, you can learn more about this, about how we operate. You can join. We're always open to new contributors. We're always open to new client projects. And you can take a look a bit more about how we work and what we care about. Thanks.